Chapter 1: The Glowing Wall. Imagine for a moment that a man from the year 1300 suddenly appeared inside your living room tonight. Not a king, not a scholar, not a priest, just an ordinary villager. Someone who has never seen electricity, never seen a car, never heard recorded music, never imagined a world beyond horses and candlelight. Now imagine that person sitting quietly on your couch, watching, listening, trying to understand the modern world. At first, he would probably be frightened by the lights, confused by the machines, astonished by the buildings, but none of those things would become his greatest mystery, because eventually, his eyes would drift toward a simple black rectangle hanging on the wall, and within minutes, he might reach a conclusion that sounds completely ridiculous. He might genuinely believe that you are a wizard. Not because of your phone, not because of the internet, not because of artificial intelligence, because of your television. And the strangest part is, the more he watched, the harder it would become to prove him wrong. If you showed a medieval villager everything inside your house, the television would probably be the object he found most disturbing, not because it was dangerous, but because it violated something he believed to be impossible, the idea that people could exist without actually being there. At first, the screen is dark, silent, lifeless, nothing unusual. Then someone presses a button, and suddenly, the wall comes alive. Faces appear, voices emerge, people begin moving, talking, laughing, arguing, singing. Entire worlds unfold before his eyes, and for several long moments, our visitor simply stares, because from his perspective, there is no obvious explanation. Imagine trying to explain what he is seeing. You tell him that the people inside the box are not actually inside the box. He doesn't believe you. You explain again. He becomes even more confused, because if they are not inside the box, where are they? The answer only makes things worse. Some are hundreds of miles away. Some are thousands. Some may already be dead, and yet their faces still appear. Their voices still speak. Their stories continue. To our visitor, this sounds less like technology and more like necromancy, because in his world, stories require storytellers, music requires musicians, performances require performers, everything has a visible source, everything has a place, everything obeys the normal rules of reality. The television seems to ignore those rules entirely. And then, the situation becomes stranger. Someone changes the channel, one world vanishes, another appears instantly, a castle becomes a city becomes a jungle becomes outer space. People appear, disappear, reappear, again and again, with the press of a button, no travel, no waiting, no preparation. And our visitor begins wondering if reality itself has become unstable, because from his perspective, entire universes now appear and disappear at your command. Imagine explaining television channels. You tell him there are hundreds, perhaps thousands. His confusion deepens. How many stories can a person possibly need? How many performances? How many entertainers? How many songs? How many plays? How many adventures? To a medieval villager, the abundance would seem impossible. A traveling performer arriving in town might be the most exciting event of the month, perhaps even the year. The entire village gathers, children run through the streets, people stop working, everyone watches, because opportunities for entertainment are rare. The performance matters. It is special. Now compare that to the modern world. Millions of performances, available instantly, every day, every night, at any hour, and somehow, many people still say there is nothing to watch. That might be the moment our visitor decides modern humans are completely insane, because from his perspective, you have achieved something kings could never have imagined: an endless theater, a magical stage, a bottomless supply of stories, and somehow, you are bored. That contradiction fascinates him, but after the confusion fades, he begins noticing something else, something even stranger. The people around him barely seem impressed. Nobody gasps, nobody stares, nobody falls to their knees in amazement. They simply sit down, pick up a snack, and continue with their evening, as though this miracle is completely ordinary. And perhaps that is one of the strangest things about being human. We adapt. The extraordinary becomes familiar. The impossible becomes expected. The miraculous becomes normal, until eventually, we stop seeing it at all. Our visitor notices this pattern everywhere. The lights, the cars, the airplanes, the televisions. Everywhere he looks, people are surrounded by miracles, yet few seem to notice them. Not because they are ungrateful, because adaptation is one of humanity's greatest talents, and perhaps also one of its strangest. Then someone introduces him to live television. At first, he assumes every performance was recorded long ago, a memory somehow trapped inside the glowing wall. That alone would seem impossible. But then you explain something astonishing. The people on the screen are performing right now, at this exact moment, hundreds of miles away, perhaps thousands, yet somehow their voices arrive instantly, their faces arrive instantly, their actions arrive instantly. No horse, no messenger, no ship, no delay. The information simply appears, and for the first time, our visitor begins to suspect that even the word magic may be inadequate, because no wizard from his world could perform such a feat, no king could command it, no priest could replicate it, and yet modern people treat it as background noise. Then someone hands him a remote control, a tiny object, small enough to fit inside a pocket, and they explain that this little device controls the glowing wall. From across the room, without touching it, without wires, without visible mechanisms, the wall obeys instantly. The images change, the sounds change, the worlds change, and our visitor slowly turns the remote over in his hands, examining it from every angle, searching for hidden strings, hidden gears, hidden magic, finding none. At this point, he may no longer be trying to understand the television. He may be trying to understand you, because from his perspective, you live among powers that would seem divine. You summon distant voices, you command moving images, you access endless stories, and yet you remain oddly unimpressed, as though these abilities are nothing special. Perhaps that would be his greatest discovery, not the television itself, but the realization that modern people live surrounded by wonders so extraordinary they have forgotten they are wonders at all. And if that revelation surprises him, what he discovers next will leave him completely speechless, because the glowing wall is only the beginning. Soon, he is about to encounter a theater with no closing time, no limits, no schedule, no end, a place containing more stories than all the kings and emperors of history combined could have consumed in 1,000 lifetimes, and once he sees it, the television will seem almost simple. Chapter 2. The Endless Theater. The following evening, our visitor believes he has finally begun to understand the glowing wall. Not completely, but enough. Enough to stop questioning whether magic exists. Enough to stop looking behind the television. Enough to accept that somehow, moving people can appear inside a box. And then someone introduces him to streaming. At first, he assumes it is simply another television channel, another collection of performances, another form of entertainment. But within minutes, he realizes he has misunderstood something important. Because this theater has no schedule, no opening hours, no closing hours, no traveling performers, no limitations, no waiting. The stories simply exist, waiting, ready to begin at any moment. Imagine trying to explain Netflix to someone from the year 1300. You tell him there are thousands of stories, perhaps tens of thousands, movies, series, documentaries, comedies, dramas, mysteries, adventures, and every one of them can begin instantly. The moment you decide. Our visitor is impressed, but not yet overwhelmed. After all, large libraries existed in his world. Monasteries contained many books. Kings collected stories. Scholars preserved knowledge. The idea of a large collection is not entirely foreign. Then you explain something else. The stories move. They speak. They sing. They fight. They laugh. They cry. And they do all of it on command. No actors required. No stage required. No audience required. The performance appears whenever you desire it, and disappears whenever you lose interest. That changes everything, because in his world, stories were events, rare experiences. People gathered for them, made time for them, looked forward to them. A storyteller arriving in town could become the highlight of an entire season. Now imagine explaining that modern people sometimes spend 40 minutes searching for a story before deciding not to watch anything at all. Our visitor would find this impossible to understand, You have access to more stories than all the kings of Europe combined, and somehow you cannot find one. He watches carefully. A person sits down on a couch, opens Netflix, scrolls, reads descriptions, watches previews, scrolls again, then closes the application. The visitor sits in silence, trying to understand what he just witnessed, because from his perspective, this is like dying of thirst beside an ocean. The abundance itself appears to have become a problem, and the more he observes, the more often he notices it. Thousands of options, yet uncertainty. Endless entertainment, yet boredom. Infinite stories, yet indecision. And eventually he begins asking questions that become surprisingly difficult to answer. Why does having more choices sometimes make choosing harder? Why does abundance sometimes feel unsatisfying? Why does unlimited access so often produce hesitation? A medieval villager would not know the term, but he would immediately recognize the pattern. Because human beings are not designed to compare thousands of possibilities. For most of history, they never had to. Imagine entering a medieval tavern. There is one storyteller, perhaps two. You listen, you enjoy the story. The evening continues. Now imagine entering a theater containing 100,000 storytellers, each shouting, "My story is better. No, mine. No, mine. No, mine." At some point, the difficulty is no longer finding a story. The difficulty is choosing one. And that realization fascinates our visitor. Because the modern world appears filled with invisible burdens created not by scarcity, but by abundance. Then someone introduces him to a movie marathon, 8 hours, 10 hours, perhaps longer, entire worlds consumed in a single day, entire fictional lives experienced before bedtime. Our visitor finds this astonishing, not because the stories exist, because of the scale. A medieval villager might hear a few hundred stories throughout his entire lifetime. Modern people can consume more stories in a month than some villages experienced in generations. At first, this sounds wonderful, and perhaps it is, but our visitor notices something unexpected. The more stories become available, the less memorable many of them appear. Because when experiences become unlimited, individual experiences sometimes lose their weight. A festival is special partly because it ends. A feast is special partly because it is rare. A story is special partly because it eventually reaches its final page. But what happens when there is always another story waiting? Another episode, another season, another recommendation, another adventure, another distraction. Always another. The endless theater never closes. And that may be its strangest feature of all. Because for most of human history, every source of entertainment eventually stopped. The musicians went home. The storyteller left town. The candles burned out. The evening ended. Darkness arrived. And with it, silence. But the endless theater does not sleep. It waits, patiently, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, offering another story, and another, until our visitor begins wondering whether the true magic is not the technology itself, but the fact that modern people can resist it at all. Because if he had been born into this world, he suspects he might never leave. How could anyone leave? The greatest collection of stories ever assembled, available instantly, at any hour, without cost beyond a monthly fee that would seem laughably small compared to the wealth it contains, and yet, modern people often walk away from it, not because they dislike stories, because eventually, even miracles become normal. And perhaps that is the lesson our visitor keeps learning. The modern world is not merely filled with magic, it is filled with familiar magic. Magic so common that people barely notice it anymore. But soon, he is about to discover something even stranger. Something that may be even more unbelievable than the endless theater. Because the next wonder does not show actors, or stories, or adventures. It shows something far more impossible. Drawings that somehow come alive. Chapter 3. The Moving Paintings. By now, our visitor has accepted that modern humans possess powers he cannot explain. The glowing wall, the endless theater, the ability to summon stories from nowhere. He no longer questions whether these things are possible, he simply accepts them. The same way a child eventually accepts that the sun will rise each morning. And then, someone introduces him to cartoons. At first, nothing seems unusual. The screen lights up, colors appear, shapes appear, movement begins. But within seconds, our visitor realizes something is terribly wrong. Because the people on the screen are not people, and yet they move. They speak, they laugh, they cry, they think, and somehow everyone around him behaves as though this is perfectly normal. Imagine showing a medieval villager a cartoon for the first time, not explaining it, just pressing play. The experience would likely be deeply unsettling, because from his perspective, the figures on the screen are neither alive nor dead, neither human nor animal, neither real nor imaginary. They exist in a strange category that has never existed before. A painting that moves, a drawing that speaks, a fantasy that behaves like reality. And that would immediately create a problem, because in the medieval world, paintings did not move, ever. A painting was a frozen moment, a fixed image, a permanent object. The idea that a painting could suddenly stand up and walk away would seem impossible. Yet here it is, happening before his eyes, again and again. Then things become stranger, because the drawing begins talking. Our visitor freezes. The drawing tells a joke. People laugh. The drawing becomes sad. People become emotional. The drawing gets into danger. People become concerned. And our visitor cannot understand why, because everyone in the room knows the character is not real, yet they react as though it matters. That fascinates him, because for the first time, he begins realizing that modern humans possess a very unusual ability. The ability to care deeply about things that do not exist. Entire emotional relationships with fictional people, fictional animals, fictional worlds, fictional lives. Now imagine trying to explain Mickey Mouse, or Bugs Bunny, or SpongeBob SquarePants to someone from the year 1300. You tell him that millions of people know these characters. Millions. The visitor immediately assumes they must be important rulers, perhaps kings, perhaps saints, perhaps legendary warriors. Then you explain that one is a mouse, another is a sponge, and another lives beneath the ocean. At this point, he may begin questioning whether the modern world has collectively lost its mind, because from his perspective, none of this makes any sense. Yet somehow, everyone understands it, everyone accepts it, everyone participates in the illusion, and that illusion only grows larger. Because eventually he discovers animated movies, entire worlds created from nothing, entire civilizations created by artists, entire histories, entire landscapes, entire species, entire universes, all existing purely inside the imagination. A medieval villager would find this extraordinary, not because imagination is new. Stories existed in his world too. Dragons, giants, magic, legends, myths. People have always imagined impossible things. The difference is that modern people can now see them, not merely hear them, not merely describe them, actually see them, moving, breathing, living, before their eyes. And perhaps that is where the real magic exists, not in the technology, but in the ability to transform imagination into something visible, something shareable, something that millions of strangers can experience together. At this point, our visitor notices another strange phenomenon. Adults watch cartoons, not children. Adults, entire grown men, entire grown women, watching animated stories, laughing, crying, feeling inspired, and this confuses him even more, because in his world, certain stories belong to children, certain stories belong to adults. The boundaries were clearer. Modern entertainment seems to ignore those boundaries entirely, and perhaps that tells him something important. That despite all the technology, despite all the sophistication, despite all the complexity, human beings still love stories, the same way they always have, the same way they always will. Only now the stories have become more powerful, more immersive, more vivid, more impossible. Then someone shows him computer animation, entire worlds created without actors, without costumes, without physical sets, without reality itself. At first he assumes real people were involved somewhere, hidden behind the scenes, manipulating everything. But eventually he learns the truth. Many of these worlds never physically existed, not once, not anywhere. They were created entirely inside machines. That revelation leaves him speechless, because now modern humans are no longer simply recording reality. They are manufacturing reality, creating experiences that never happened, places that never existed, people that never lived, and somehow making them feel real. The visitor sits quietly, watching, thinking, trying to understand, and eventually he reaches a conclusion. Perhaps the greatest magic modern humans possess is not technology, It is imagination, the ability to dream impossible things, and then somehow make other people see those dreams. But soon, he is about to discover something even stranger. Because cartoons are harmless, cartoons are playful, cartoons are entertaining. The next wonder is something entirely different. A wheel, a stage, a screaming audience, and millions of people watching complete strangers celebrate random luck. A form of entertainment so bizarre that our visitor may struggle to believe it is real. Chapter 4. The Wheel of Fortune. By now, our visitor has accepted many impossible things. Moving paintings, endless theaters, entire worlds trapped inside glowing walls. And although he still cannot explain them, he has stopped trying. Modern humans clearly possess powers beyond his understanding. Then one evening, he discovers something far stranger. Not magic, not technology, entertainment. At first, it seems harmless. A brightly lit stage, a smiling host, a cheering audience. People appear excited. The atmosphere feels festive, comforting even. Our visitor relaxes. At last, something familiar. Because fairs existed in his world, festivals existed, competitions existed. Human beings have always gathered to celebrate. Then he notices a giant wheel. A wheel covered in numbers, covered in prizes, covered in symbols. And before long, someone spins it. The audience gasps. People lean forward. The wheel slows. Click, click, click. And suddenly, hundreds of people erupt with joy. Our visitor blinks, confused, because from his perspective, a wheel has simply rotated, that is all. Yet everyone behaves as though destiny itself has spoken. The more he watches, the stranger it becomes. People celebrate when strangers win money. People mourn when strangers lose money. People become emotionally invested in events that have absolutely no effect on their own lives. And our visitor begins to realize something. Modern humans have somehow transformed uncertainty into entertainment. In his world, uncertainty was usually terrifying. Would the harvest succeed? Would winter be harsh? Would the crops survive? Would disease arrive? Uncertainty meant risk. But here, uncertainty has become a game, a spectacle, a source of excitement. And the examples only become stranger. Someone opens a briefcase, the audience screams. Someone guesses letters, the audience screams. Someone presses a button, the audience screams. Someone chooses between two boxes, the audience screams. At this point, our visitor begins wondering if modern entertainment consists entirely of people opening containers. Then someone introduces him to a dating show. A single man stands before 20 women, or a single woman stands before 20 men. One by one they are eliminated. The audience watches eagerly, discussing chemistry, romance, compatibility. At first, our visitor assumes these must be royal marriage negotiations. Perhaps a prince, perhaps a princess, perhaps some important political arrangement. Then he learns the truth. Millions of people are voluntarily watching strangers choose romantic partners for entertainment. The realization leaves him speechless, because in his world, courtship was private, marriage was serious, family involvement was expected. Yet modern humans have transformed romance into a public tournament, complete with dramatic music, eliminations, and commercial breaks. Our visitor stares silently at the screen, trying to determine whether this is comedy or ritual. Then things become even stranger. Someone introduces him to a program called Big Brother. The concept sounds simple. A group of people voluntarily live together in a house. Nothing unusual so far. Then he discovers the audience is watching them, constantly, eating, talking, sleeping, arguing, existing, and millions of viewers find this fascinating. Our visitor cannot understand why, because from his perspective, watching ordinary people live ordinary lives requires only one thing, a window. Yet somehow, modern humans have convinced entire nations to watch strangers brush their teeth and call it entertainment. Then someone shows him MTV Cribs. The premise appears even more absurd. Wealthy people invite millions of strangers into their homes. They proudly display bedrooms, bathrooms, swimming pools, cars, closets, everything. The visitor becomes deeply confused, because for most of history, wealth was protected, hidden, guarded. Now people voluntarily broadcast it to the entire world, and strangers watch eagerly, not because they know these people, because they are curious, and perhaps a little envious. Then comes the talent show. Finally, something sensible. People demonstrating genuine skill, singing, dancing, performing, competing. This our visitor understands. Human beings have always admired excellence. But then he notices the judges, the applause, the voting, the dramatic backstories, the emotional music, and he realizes something. The competition is no longer the entire show. The story has become just as important as the talent, perhaps even more important. Because modern humans do not simply watch performances, they watch journeys, transformations, victories, failures, dreams, and disappointments. The visitor finds this surprisingly beautiful, because despite all the technology, the thing people care about most remains unchanged. People. Not machines, not screens, people. Then someone switches to live sports. At first, our visitor sees a ball, a field, several players, nothing remarkable. Then he notices the crowd. Tens of thousands, shouting, singing, cheering, waving banners, and suddenly he becomes interested, because this feels familiar, very familiar, almost religious. The same energy, the same rituals, the same symbols, the same collective emotion. And when he learns that millions more are watching from home, he begins to understand something profound. Modern humans may have changed their tools, their technology, their clothing, their buildings, but they have not changed themselves. They still gather, still celebrate, still compete, still tell stories, still seek excitement, still seek belonging. The forms are different, the desires are ancient, and perhaps that is the strangest discovery of all. Not that modern entertainment seems bizarre, but that beneath all the lights, all the screens, all the spectacle, it is still serving the same purpose it always has, helping human beings feel something together. And yet, our visitor is about to encounter something even more unbelievable. Because the next wonder is not a game, not a competition, not a performance, it is a device containing more knowledge than all the libraries, monasteries, scholars, and kings in history combined. A magical object capable of answering almost any question, and somehow, people mostly use it to argue with strangers. Chapter 5. The Crystal Ball. After witnessing game shows, reality television, talent competitions, and endless theaters, our visitor begins to believe there is very little left that can surprise him. Modern humans clearly possess extraordinary powers, strange powers, sometimes ridiculous powers, but powers nonetheless. Then one afternoon, someone places a small object into his hands, a smartphone. At first, he is unimpressed. Compared to the giant glowing wall, this thing appears almost insignificant. Tiny, fragile, ordinary, certainly not magical. In fact, he nearly loses interest. Then someone asks a simple question: what is the tallest mountain on Earth? The device immediately answers. Our visitor pauses. Interesting. Then another question: how far away is the moon? The device answers again. Then another: what is the capital of Japan? Again, an answer appears instantly. At first he assumes there must be a scholar hidden inside, perhaps a very small scholar, an extremely knowledgeable scholar, a scholar who never sleeps, a scholar who somehow knows everything. This explanation seems reasonable, at least compared to the alternatives, because the alternatives quickly become absurd. Imagine explaining Google to someone from the year 1300. You tell him that this object can answer nearly any question, not some questions, not many questions, almost any question. Questions about geography, questions about history, questions about medicine, questions about language, questions about mathematics, questions about astronomy, questions about animals, questions about distant lands, questions about people who lived centuries ago, questions about people who are alive right now. The visitor listens carefully, then asks the obvious question: who wrote all of this? The answer is difficult, because somehow millions of people contributed. Millions. The number itself would be difficult for him to comprehend. His entire village might contain 200 people, perhaps 300. Now imagine telling him that millions of strangers have collectively created the largest collection of knowledge in human history, and that collection fits inside your pocket. At this point, he no longer believes you are a wizard. He begins wondering whether you have stolen knowledge from the gods, because throughout history knowledge was expensive, rare, difficult. A person might spend months traveling to consult a scholar, a monastery, a library, a teacher. Information required effort. Today, answers appear in seconds, and that alone would seem miraculous, but the miracle has only begun, because eventually someone opens Google Maps. The visitor watches carefully. At first he sees roads, nothing unusual. Roads existed in his world. Then he notices something impossible. The map knows where you are, not approximately, exactly. Every turn, every street, every building. The map watches your movement in real time, and somehow guides you wherever you wish to go. The visitor stares, confused, because in his world, getting lost was normal, expected even. Travel required memory, experience, directions from strangers, landmarks, luck. Now imagine explaining that modern people sometimes complain because navigation takes an extra 5 minutes. 5 minutes. A medieval traveler might spend an entire day lost, possibly longer. Yet modern humans become frustrated when the magical map is slightly inconvenient. Again, our visitor notices the same pattern. Miracles become expectations. Then, someone introduces him to weather forecasts. This completely breaks his brain, because predicting weather was one of humanity's oldest obsessions. Farmers wanted it, sailors wanted it, kings wanted it, everyone wanted it. The weather controlled survival itself. Now imagine telling a medieval farmer that tomorrow's weather can often be predicted today. Rain, sunshine, temperature, wind, storms, all visible on a glowing screen. The visitor becomes suspicious. This sounds far too much like prophecy. Then he discovers translation apps. This feels even stranger. A person speaks one language. The device instantly converts it into another. A traveler from France speaks. Someone from Japan understands. Someone from Brazil responds. Everyone communicates. The visitor sits quietly, trying to understand how one object can perform the work of 1,000 scholars, and then things become truly ridiculous. Someone asks the device for directions. The device answers. Someone asks for weather. The device answers. Someone asks for history. The device answers. Someone asks for recipes. The device answers. Someone asks for mathematical calculations. The device answers. The visitor slowly reaches a conclusion. The object appears to know everything, or at least more than any human being reasonably should. At this point, he believes he has discovered the greatest magical artifact in history. Then he observes how people actually use it, and suddenly he becomes confused again, because despite possessing unlimited knowledge, many people spend hours arguing, not discussing, arguing with strangers, complete strangers, people they have never met, people they will never meet, people whose names they do not know. Entire evenings disappear into arguments. Arguments about politics, arguments about celebrities, arguments about sports, arguments about things that have almost no effect on their lives whatsoever. Our visitor cannot understand this, because if someone handed a medieval scholar unlimited access to human knowledge, he would probably spend every waking moment learning, studying, exploring, discovering. Modern humans often do something else. They watch videos of cats, and somehow, this confuses the visitor even more, because the cats are not ordinary cats. The cats play pianos, wear costumes, fall off furniture, become famous, millions of people watch, millions more laugh. The visitor begins to suspect that perhaps unlimited knowledge was inevitable, but unlimited cat videos, that is the true mystery. And yet, he cannot stop watching either. Perhaps that is the most surprising discovery of all. The crystal ball is not merely useful, it is irresistible, because it contains answers, entertainment, maps, music, stories, knowledge, communication, games, and endless curiosity. Every question leads to another. Every answer creates another question. The crystal ball never empties, never sleeps, never runs out of information, and perhaps that is why people carry it everywhere. Not because it is convenient, because it is difficult not to. After all, for most of history, human beings searched desperately for knowledge. Now knowledge follows them, into their homes, into their beds, into their pockets, into every moment of their lives. And that may be the greatest magic our visitor has encountered so far. Not that modern humans can access information, but that they can access nearly all information at almost any time, from almost any place. And yet, somehow, they still feel uncertain, still feel confused, still feel lost, because knowledge and wisdom, as our visitor quietly realizes, may not be the same thing. But soon, he is about to discover something even stranger, something that would seem impossible even after everything he has already seen. not a device that answers questions, a device that answers back, a machine capable of holding a conversation, a machine that appears to think. And once our visitor encounters it, he may finally decide that modern humans are not merely wizards, they have begun creating new ones. Chapter 6. The Talking Machine. By now, our visitor has seen many impossible things. A glowing wall filled with moving people, an endless theater containing more stories than entire kingdoms, paintings that come alive, magical maps that know where you are, a crystal ball containing nearly all human knowledge. At this point, he believes very little can surprise him. Modern humans are clearly capable of extraordinary things. Then someone places a smartphone in front of him, opens an application, and begins talking to it. At first, our visitor assumes the person is speaking to another human, perhaps someone hidden inside the device, perhaps a scholar, perhaps a messenger. That explanation would make sense. Then he notices something strange. There is no other person, no messenger, no operator, no servant, no scholar, only a machine. Yet the machine answers, not with sounds, not with random noises, with words, thoughtful words, relevant words, useful words. And for the first time during his entire journey, our visitor feels genuinely unsettled. Because moving pictures are one thing, maps are one thing, knowledge is one thing, conversation is something else entirely. Imagine introducing artificial intelligence to someone from the year 1300. Not gradually, not carefully, simply showing it in action. You ask a question, the machine answers. You ask another, the machine answers again. You ask for a story, the machine creates one. You ask for advice, the machine responds. You ask for a poem, the machine writes one. The visitor watches in silence, trying to determine where the person is hiding, because there must be a person somewhere. Surely, someone must be doing the work, someone must be listening, someone must be thinking, someone must be responding. The alternative seems impossible. Then you explain that no human is involved. The machine generates the answers itself. And now, our visitor becomes deeply suspicious, because from his perspective, thinking is something only people do. Animals perhaps, people certainly, machines, never. The idea itself violates reality. A hammer does not think, a wheel does not think, a cart does not think, a windmill does not think. Why would a machine think? And yet this one appears to. The visitor decides to test it. Carefully, he asks a simple question. The machine answers. He asks another. The machine answers again, then another, and another. The answers continue. Hours later, he is still testing it, still searching for the trick, still searching for the hidden person, still searching for the explanation. Eventually, he reaches a troubling conclusion. Either modern humans have built a machine that can think, or they have become extraordinarily good at faking it. Neither answer makes him comfortable. Then things become stranger, because someone asks the machine to write a story, one that never existed before. And within seconds, it does. The visitor freezes, because storytellers exist in his world. Good storytellers are respected. Great storytellers are rare. Creating stories requires imagination, experience, creativity, memory, humanity. Now a machine appears capable of doing the same thing, and that realization genuinely frightens him. Not because the machine is dangerous, because it seems impossible. The visitor begins asking unusual questions. Can it compose songs? Yes. Can it write poems? Yes. Can it answer questions? Yes. Can it explain complicated ideas? Yes. Can it invent new ideas? Sometimes. The answers leave him increasingly confused, because every new ability seems to violate another assumption about reality. Then someone explains something even stranger. Millions of people are using similar systems, every day, across the world, for work, for learning, for creativity, for entertainment, for conversation. The visitor struggles to process the scale, because he remembers a time when finding a knowledgeable teacher could take weeks, perhaps months. Now every person carries one in their pocket at all times, and somehow people still complain. This no longer surprises him. By now, he has noticed a pattern. Modern humans complain about miracles constantly. Then someone asks the machine a philosophical question. The machine answers, not perfectly, but thoughtfully. The visitor leans forward. interested. Then someone asks a historical question, the machine answers, then a scientific question, then a mathematical question, then a creative question. The machine continues responding, and gradually, the visitor begins noticing something peculiar. The machine is not simply providing information, it is participating, and that feels different, because for most of history, knowledge was passive. Books waited, libraries waited, teachers waited, you sought them out. This machine feels active, responsive, almost alive, not truly alive, but close enough to create discomfort, and perhaps that discomfort reveals something important. Because human beings have always defined themselves by certain abilities: language, reasoning, creativity, problem-solving, storytelling. For thousands of years, these felt uniquely human. Now machines are beginning to participate in some of them, and our visitor wonders what happens next, not with fear, with curiosity, because every generation eventually encounters something that feels impossible. Printing presses, telescopes, steam engines, electricity, television, the internet, and now, machines that appear capable of conversation. Perhaps future generations will consider them ordinary, the same way modern people consider televisions ordinary, the same way televisions became furniture, the same way miracles become background noise. The visitor has seen this pattern repeatedly. The impossible arrives. People are amazed. Time passes, the impossible becomes normal, and eventually, people forget how impossible it once seemed. As evening falls, our visitor sits quietly beside the talking machine, still unconvinced, still fascinated, still searching for an explanation. But one thought continues returning. Perhaps the greatest magic modern humans possess is not creating machines, it is teaching those machines to speak. And if that thought is unsettling, what he discovers next may be even stranger. Because the next wonder is not a machine, not a screen, not a device. It is something modern humans willingly watch, something so bizarre that our visitor initially believes it must be a joke. A vast library of intimacy, available instantly, to anyone, at any time, and what it reveals about human nature may surprise him more than any technology ever could. Chapter 7. The Forbidden Library. After encountering the talking machine, our visitor begins to believe he has finally discovered the limits of modern magic. A machine that answers questions, a machine that writes stories, a machine that appears to think. Surely nothing could be stranger than that. Then someone hands him a smartphone, opens a website, and begins scrolling. At first, nothing seems unusual. Faces, people, photographs, a familiar sight. Then he notices something strange. The faces never stop. One person, then another, an endless procession of strangers, millions of them, perhaps billions, all waiting inside a small glowing rectangle. And suddenly our visitor realizes he has discovered something entirely new, not a machine, not a library, not a theater, a marketplace of human attention, and that may be the strangest invention of all. For most of history, human beings could only know a limited number of people, a family, a village, perhaps a nearby town, maybe a few travelers, a merchant, a priest, a local noble. The number was small, understandable, manageable. Today our visitor discovers something very different. Modern humans spend hours looking at people they have never met, will never meet, and may never even speak to. This fascinates him, because from his perspective attention is valuable, extremely valuable. In his world, attention was usually earned. A skilled craftsman earned it. A respected elder earned it. A talented storyteller earned it. A great warrior earned it. Yet here people gather attention on scales that seem impossible. Millions of eyes focused on a single person, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. At first, our visitor assumes these people must be kings, or queens, or military leaders, perhaps famous scholars. Then someone explains the truth. Many are simply entertainers, content creators, influencers, internet personalities, and now our visitor becomes deeply confused, because millions of people know these individuals, yet the individuals know almost none of them. It feels backwards. Imagine explaining this relationship to a medieval villager. You tell him that millions of people follow the daily life of a complete stranger. They know where the stranger travels, what the stranger eats, what the stranger wears, who the stranger dates. how the stranger decorates their house, what the stranger does for fun. The visitor listens carefully, then asks an obvious question. Are they rulers? No. Are they saints? No. Are they famous generals? No. Then why is everyone watching them? And suddenly you realize how difficult that question is to answer, because in many ways, modern attention has become disconnected from traditional importance. Some of the most watched people in the world hold no political power, no military power, no religious authority, and yet their influence can reach entire continents. Our visitor finds this remarkable, but things become stranger still, because eventually he notices something else. Many people do not merely watch strangers, they admire them, compare themselves to them, dream about them, discuss them, think about them, sometimes every day, even though they have never met and never will. The visitor struggles to understand this because in his world, social relationships were physical, personal, direct. You knew people because they existed around you. Modern humans often feel connected to people they have never encountered in real life. This seems impossible, yet it happens constantly. Then someone explains celebrities, movie stars, musicians, athletes, online personalities. The visitor immediately assumes these people must be extraordinarily rare, perhaps one or two in an entire kingdom. Then he learns there are thousands, tens of thousands, perhaps more, entire industries devoted to fame, entire careers built around visibility. And once again, our visitor encounters a familiar pattern: abundance, not abundance of food, not abundance of wealth, abundance of people, abundance of faces, abundance of personalities, abundance of attention, an endless human catalog. And that catalog never closes, never sleeps, never stops growing. The visitor finds this overwhelming because every human face contains a story, every story contains a life, and modern humans have access to more lives than any generation in history, far more than the human mind was ever designed to process. Then he discovers something even stranger. Some people voluntarily broadcast nearly everything: their homes, their thoughts, their relationships, their daily routines, their celebrations, their disappointments, their vacations, their meals, their pets, their wardrobes, their purchases, their opinions, everything. The visitor cannot understand why, because privacy was valuable in his world, information was valuable, reputation was valuable. Now people willingly reveal enormous portions of their lives to complete strangers, not because they are forced, because they choose to, and sometimes because millions of people enjoy watching. At this point, our visitor begins wondering whether attention has become a kind of currency, not money, not gold, not land, attention, because attention seems capable of purchasing everything else: influence, opportunity, status, income, power. The more he observes, the more convinced he becomes. And perhaps that realization explains many mysteries of the modern world: why people post, why people share, why people perform, why people compete for visibility, because attention itself has become valuable. Then something truly bizarre happens. Someone shows him a creator subscription platform, a place where people willingly pay to gain access to a stranger's life. Extra photos, extra videos, extra updates, extra attention. The visitor stares silently, trying to understand, because from his perspective, people are now paying for access to people they do not know, and those people are earning livelihoods through attention itself, not goods, not services, attention. The concept feels almost alchemical, as though visibility itself has been transformed into gold, and perhaps that is exactly what happened. The more our visitor studies the modern world, the more he realizes that attention may be the most valuable resource of all. Every company wants it, every platform wants it, every creator wants it, every advertisement wants it, every notification wants it, everyone is competing for it, and unlike money, attention can only be spent once. This realization lingers in his mind, because for the first time, he begins to suspect that the greatest magic of the modern age is not technology. It is the ability to command human attention at extraordinary scale. Millions of minds focus simultaneously on the same thing, the same face, the same story, the same moment. No king in history possessed such power, no emperor, no pope, no conqueror, yet modern humans create these moments every day, and somehow most people barely notice. As evening settles, our visitor reflects on everything he has seen: the glowing wall, the endless theater, the moving paintings, the wheel of fortune, the crystal ball, the talking machine, and now, the infinite crowd, a world where billions of people compete for the same scarce resource, human attention, and perhaps that resource is more powerful than magic itself. But soon, our visitor is about to discover something even stranger, because the next wonder is not a screen, not a machine, not a crowd. It is something every modern person carries, something invisible, something that shapes decisions every single day, a force so powerful that entire lives can be organized around it. Chapter 8. The Tyranny of the Clock. After discovering the infinite crowd, our visitor begins to notice something peculiar. At first, it seems insignificant, almost invisible. A habit so common that nobody appears to notice it anymore. Yet once he sees it, he cannot stop seeing it. People are constantly checking the time, while eating, while walking, while talking, while driving, while working, sometimes even while doing absolutely nothing at all, again and again and again. The behavior fascinates him, because from his perspective, modern humans appear to live under the rule of an invisible king, a ruler nobody elected, a ruler nobody sees, a ruler nobody argues with. The clock. Imagine explaining modern timekeeping to someone from the year 1300. At first, the idea seems familiar. Medieval people understood time. The sun rose, the sun set, the seasons changed, the church bells rang, life followed rhythms, time certainly existed. But modern time feels different, much different. In his world, time was something people observed. In your world, time appears to be something people obey. That distinction immediately captures his attention. Imagine telling him that two people can agree to meet at exactly 8:13 in the morning. Not sometime after sunrise, not during the morning, not when the roads are clear. 8:13, precisely. The visitor would probably laugh. Not because the idea is foolish, because it sounds impossibly specific. Why 13? Why not 12? Why not 15? How can a society function with such precision? Then he discovers something even stranger. People become frustrated when others are late. Not by hours, not by days, sometimes by only a few minutes. 5 minutes, 3 minutes, even 1 minute. The visitor struggles to understand, because in his world, a journey depended on weather, road conditions, animals, accidents, unexpected events. Life was unpredictable. The idea that entire societies could coordinate themselves down to individual minutes would seem miraculous, and perhaps a little exhausting. Then someone shows him an alarm clock. The visitor listens carefully. A machine makes a loud noise. A sleeping person immediately wakes up. The machine has decided the day should begin, and the human obeys. The visitor stares, confused, because from his perspective, this arrangement feels backwards. Shouldn't the person decide? Shouldn't the body decide? Shouldn't the sun decide? Instead, a tiny machine determines when millions of people rise from bed every morning. The visitor cannot help finding this strange. Then he learns something even more surprising. Many people dislike the alarm. Some hate it. Some hit a button to delay it. Some set multiple alarms because they do not trust themselves to obey the first one. Yet despite all this, the ritual repeats every day. The machine rings. The human obeys. Again, and again, and again. The visitor begins suspecting that modern life is governed by schedules in ways previous generations would never understand. Then someone introduces him to the calendar. At first, he assumes calendars simply mark important occasions, festivals, religious holidays, harvest seasons, special events. That seems reasonable. Then he sees a modern calendar. Entire weeks filled with appointments, meetings, reminders, deadlines, commitments, obligations. The visitor stares silently, because many of these events have not happened yet, and yet, they already seem to control people's lives. A person may wake up stressed because of something scheduled next Thursday, or next month, or even next year. The visitor finds this remarkable, because modern humans seem capable of worrying about events long before they arrive. The future appears to occupy enormous amounts of attention. Then he notices another word, deadline. The word itself sounds dramatic, and perhaps for good reason. Modern life appears full of them. Work deadlines, school deadlines, Application deadlines, payment deadlines, project deadlines. Everything has a line, and people spend much of their lives racing toward it. The visitor watches workers checking clocks, checking calendars, checking reminders, checking schedules, constantly measuring progress against time, and slowly, he begins to realize something. Modern people do not merely use clocks, they organize their lives around them. The clock decides when work begins, when work ends, when lunch happens, when meetings happen, when trains leave, when schools open, when stores close. The clock seems to coordinate millions of strangers, and in many ways, the visitor finds this deeply impressive, because the system works, most of the time. Millions of people move through society with remarkable coordination, something that would have been nearly impossible in his world. But every miracle comes with a price, and eventually, the visitor notices the cost. Many people appear rushed, always rushing, rushing to work, rushing home, rushing to appointments, rushing to finish tasks, rushing to prepare for tomorrow. Always moving, always checking, always planning. The visitor cannot help wondering when life became such a race. Then something interesting happens. One evening, he sits with a family during dinner. Nobody checks the time. Nobody checks their schedule. Nobody seems in a hurry. People talk, laugh, tell stories, and for a brief moment, something changes. The atmosphere feels different. The clock still exists, but nobody seems to care. The visitor immediately notices, because he has felt this before, many times, moments when time disappears, a great conversation, a meaningful story, a walk through nature, a meal with friends, a beautiful sunset, a night beneath the stars, moments where an hour feels like 5 minutes, moments where 5 minutes feel timeless, and suddenly, the visitor begins to suspect something. Perhaps people do not actually want more time. Perhaps they want more moments that feel meaningful, because those are not the same thing. A person can have an entire free day and feel dissatisfied. Another person can experience 10 wonderful minutes and remember them forever. The difference is not time itself. The difference is attention. That realization feels familiar. Throughout his journey, the visitor keeps returning to the same conclusion. Attention shapes experience. The glowing wall captured attention. The endless theater captured attention. The infinite crowd captured attention. The talking machine captured attention. And now, the clock captures attention too. Not because it is evil, not because it is wrong, because whatever humans pay attention to eventually shapes the way they experience reality. The visitor looks around one final time. He sees the clocks, the schedules, the calendars, the reminders, the alarms, and he realizes something surprising. The greatest magic of the modern world may not be television, or artificial intelligence, or the internet. It may be the ability to coordinate millions of people through invisible measurements of time. A kind of magic so ordinary that nobody even thinks of it as magic anymore. And perhaps that is the true pattern he has discovered. Every miracle eventually becomes normal. Every wonder eventually becomes routine. Every impossible thing eventually becomes part of everyday life, until people forget how extraordinary it really is. But our visitor has not forgotten, and as his journey through the modern world nears its end, he is beginning to understand something important. Modern humans are surrounded by magic, not because they possess supernatural powers, but because they live among wonders that previous generations could never have imagined. Yet despite all these miracles, their hopes remain familiar, their fears remain familiar, their dreams remain familiar, and that realization may be the most surprising discovery of all, because the final lesson of his journey is not about technology, not about entertainment, not about machines. It is about people, and why human beings remain remarkably unchanged, even in a world that feels completely transformed. Chapter 9. The Flying Dragons. After spending weeks exploring the modern world, our visitor believes he has finally become difficult to impress. He has seen talking machines, endless libraries, moving paintings, infinite theaters, glowing walls, magical maps, and devices capable of answering almost any question. Surely, nothing else could surprise him now. Then, one afternoon, he hears a sound, a distant roar, low at first, almost like thunder, but different. The sound grows louder, and louder, and louder. People around him barely react. They continue walking, talking, drinking coffee, checking their phones. Nobody appears concerned, which immediately concerns our visitor, because if a noise that loud existed in his world, everyone would stop what they were doing. Everyone. Then he looks up and sees something impossible, a giant metal beast crossing the sky. The visitor freezes. For several long seconds, he simply stares, because there is no category in his mind for what he is seeing. It is larger than a house, larger than many buildings, yet somehow it flies, not briefly, not like a bird gliding through the air, not like an arrow, not like a stone launched from a catapult. It travels deliberately, confidently, as though the sky itself belongs to it. The visitor cannot understand, because in his world, human beings do not fly. Stories fly, angels fly, dragons fly. Human beings do not. And yet there it is, crossing the heavens, ignoring every rule he has ever known. Imagine showing an airplane to someone from the year 1300. Not explaining it, not preparing them, simply pointing upward. The experience would be overwhelming, because flight was one of humanity's oldest dreams. People imagined it, wrote stories about it, created myths around it, yet nobody achieved it. Not kings, not scholars, not emperors, not inventors. The sky remained out of reach. Now imagine explaining that modern humans do not merely fly occasionally, they fly constantly, every day, every hour, across the entire planet. Thousands of giant flying machines crossing the sky simultaneously. At this point, our visitor begins wondering whether modern humans are intentionally trying to imitate dragons. Then he learns something even stranger. The machine is carrying people. Not one person, not two, hundreds, entire groups of strangers, suspended thousands of feet above the earth, and somehow everyone treats this as normal. The visitor is astonished, because in his world, crossing an ocean was a major undertaking. Traveling to another kingdom might require weeks, sometimes months. The journey itself became part of life. Roads were slow, ships were slow, animals were slow, distance mattered. Now distance appears to have been defeated. Someone casually mentions flying from London to New York. The visitor assumes this must be an expedition, a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Then he discovers people do this for business meetings, sometimes for holidays, sometimes simply because tickets were cheap. This revelation nearly breaks him, because what once required extraordinary effort now requires little more than a booking confirmation. The world has somehow become smaller, much smaller. Then someone explains international travel. The visitor learns that people can eat breakfast in one country, have lunch in another, and go to sleep in a third. At first, he assumes this is a joke. Surely no human being could move that quickly. Then he discovers it is true, and suddenly he begins viewing the entire planet differently, because in his world, most people would never travel far from where they were born. Many villages contained people who spent their entire lives within a few miles of home. Now modern humans cross continents as casually as medieval villagers crossed fields. The scale feels impossible, but the surprises continue, because eventually, someone introduces him to helicopters. At first, he believes the airplane has become even more ridiculous. The machine does not glide, it does not race across the sky, it simply hovers, motionless, like a giant mechanical insect. The visitor stares upward, trying desperately to understand, because now the machine is not merely flying, it appears to be ignoring gravity altogether. And gravity, in his experience, is not optional. Yet somehow modern humans have turned it into a suggestion. Then comes the greatest shock of all. Someone mentions the moon. The visitor nods politely. The moon is familiar. Everyone knows the moon. Then they explain that human beings have visited it. The visitor laughs. A good joke. An impossible joke. Then he realizes nobody else is laughing. The room remains serious, and for the first time during his journey, he feels genuinely speechless. Because flight is one thing, the moon is something else entirely. Imagine explaining that human beings left the earth, traveled through the heavens, walked upon another world, and returned. Not in myth, not in legend, in reality. The visitor cannot process the idea, because throughout history, the moon belonged to stories, poetry, religion, mystery. Now modern humans have left footprints there. Footprints on the moon. The thought feels absurd, yet somehow, it is true. And the strangest part, many people rarely think about it. The visitor notices this pattern again. The impossible becomes ordinary. The miraculous becomes familiar. The extraordinary becomes routine. Modern humans live surrounded by achievements that previous generations would have considered divine, and yet they often treat them as background noise. Then someone explains satellites, thousands of machines orbiting above the planet, watching, communicating, connecting, helping people communicate, helping people understand the world below. The visitor no longer even attempts to understand the mechanics. He has moved beyond understanding. He has entered a state of permanent astonishment, because every answer seems to create 10 more impossible questions. And perhaps that is the true lesson of the flying dragons. Not that modern humans learn to fly, but that they refuse to accept limits. Generation after generation, people looked at impossible problems and continued trying, again and again and again, until eventually, the impossible became reality. As evening falls, our visitor watches another aircraft crossing the sky, a glowing light moving silently among the stars, and for a moment, he imagines returning home, returning to the year 1300, trying to explain everything he has seen. The glowing walls, the endless theaters, the talking machines, the infinite crowd, the flying dragons. Nobody would believe him, not a single person, and perhaps he would not blame them, because even now, after witnessing all of it himself, part of him still struggles to believe it. But his journey is almost over, and one final realization awaits him. A realization more important than any machine, more important than any invention, more important than any miracle, because after everything he has seen, he is finally ready to answer a simple question. Are modern humans truly wizards, or is something else happening entirely? Chapter 10. Final chapter. The Great Realization. Our visitor stands quietly beneath the night sky. For a long time, he says nothing. How could he? Over the course of his journey, he has witnessed things that would have seemed impossible in his own age. Walls that come alive, libraries that answer questions, machines that hold conversations, maps that know where you are, theaters with no end, paintings that move, dragons that fly through the sky, and human beings who have walked upon the moon. 1,000 years ago, many of these things would have been called magic, and perhaps they still are, just a different kind of magic. The visitor looks around one final time. The streets glow with artificial light. The distant hum of machines fills the air. Information travels faster than thought. Entire continents communicate instantly. People carry more knowledge in their pockets than the greatest scholars of his age could gather in a lifetime. The world seems transformed beyond recognition, and yet the longer he observed, the more he noticed something surprising. The miracles changed, the people did not. A mother still worries about her children. A young man still wonders what his future will become. A woman still searches for love. Friends still gather to laugh. Families still share meals. People still tell stories, still dream, still hope, still fear, still wonder whether they are making the right choices. The visitor finds this comforting, because for much of his journey, he believed he was studying a completely different species, a civilization of wizards, a civilization of impossible machines, a civilization living inside miracles. But beneath all the magic, he discovered something familiar. Human nature, the same human nature he knew back home, the same hopes, the same insecurities, the same longing for meaning, the same desire to belong, the same search for happiness. Only the environment has changed, the stage has changed, the costumes have changed, the tools have changed. The human heart remains remarkably similar, and perhaps that is the most surprising discovery of all, because from a distance, history often feels like a story about change, new inventions, new empires, new technologies, new ideas, but when you look closer, history is often a story about continuity. Generation after generation, people confronting the same questions. Who am I? Where do I belong? What matters? What should I do with the time I have? Our visitor realizes that modern humans ask these questions just as often as medieval ones. They simply ask them through different tools, different screens, different machines, different distractions. The questions remain. Then he begins thinking about everything he has witnessed, the endless theater, the infinite crowd, the talking machine, the crystal ball, the flying dragons. He thought these inventions would solve humanity's problems. Surely a civilization with such power must have conquered uncertainty, conquered loneliness, conquered fear, conquered doubt. But that is not what he found. Instead, he found people, people using extraordinary tools to solve ordinary human problems, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully, but always searching, always striving, always hoping. And somehow, that makes the modern world feel less alien, not more, because the visitor finally understands something important. Technology changes what humans can do. It doesn't change what humans are. A television can entertain you. It cannot tell you what kind of life to live. A search engine can answer questions. It cannot decide which questions matter. A machine can hold a conversation. It cannot choose your purpose. An airplane can take you anywhere in the world. It cannot tell you where you belong. Those answers remain stubbornly human, and perhaps they always will. The visitor smiles, because after everything he has seen, he no longer thinks modern humans are strange, at least, not any stranger than his own people. They simply face different versions of the same challenges, different forms of temptation, different forms of uncertainty, different forms of distraction. The core experience remains remarkably familiar. Then he notices something else. Throughout his journey, he has repeatedly been amazed by things modern people barely notice: the television, the internet, the smartphone, artificial intelligence, air travel. People walk past miracles every day, not because they are ungrateful, because familiarity hides wonder. The impossible eventually becomes ordinary, the extraordinary becomes routine, the miracle becomes furniture, and perhaps that is not a flaw. Perhaps it is one of humanity's greatest strengths, the ability to adapt, to normalize, to continue moving forward. If every miracle remained overwhelming forever, progress would become impossible. Yet the visitor cannot help feeling that something valuable is occasionally lost: a sense of wonder, a sense of perspective, a recognition of how extraordinary these achievements truly are. Because when miracles become invisible, people sometimes forget how far they have come. The visitor looks toward the stars, the same stars he knew in the year 1300, the same stars shining above your home tonight. For a moment, the centuries disappear, the distance between worlds disappears, and he realizes that despite everything, humans remain connected, across generations, across cultures, across time itself. Every person who has ever lived has stared at the sky and wondered about their place in the world. Every person has experienced joy, fear, hope, loss, curiosity, love. The details change, the experience remains, and perhaps that is the final lesson of his journey. Modern humans are not wizards because they built extraordinary machines. They are not wizards because they conquered the skies. They are not wizards because they created artificial intelligence. They are wizards because generation after generation, they imagined impossible things and then refused to stop until those impossible things became real. That is the real magic, not the inventions, the imagination behind them, the persistence behind them, the willingness to believe that tomorrow could be different from today. And maybe that has always been humanity's greatest gift. The visitor takes one last look at the modern world, the lights, the cities, the screens, the endless possibilities, and finally, he reaches his conclusion. Yes, a medieval villager would probably think you are a wizard, and after everything he has seen, he might not be entirely wrong. Good night, and thank you for joining me on this journey through the wonders of the modern world. If our visitor's journey has left you curious about the world around you, if you find yourself looking at ordinary things just a little differently tonight, then perhaps you might consider joining him on the next chapter. Subscribe to the Thinking Sleeper. New wonders await.